everybody. Welcome to the Energy Newsbeat podcast. My name's Stu Turley, President of the Sandstone Group. Today is a fantastic day. I've got a great friend of the show. I've got Dr. Gene Nelson, PhD, and he is here with Green Nuke Substack. He's got a heck of a show lined up for us. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Nelson. How are you today, sir?
Very good, Stu, and also glad to be alive.
We were just chit-chatting before the show, and holy smokes, Batman, you almost got rear-ended by pulling a trailer?
Yeah, and I think in a lesser vehicle, I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be dead.
Ooh, that's not good. I am so glad you're here. We need your expertise, believe me.
Thank you.
And let's get started with your Substack. I love your Substack. Right. It's called The Green Nuke. And the article that prompted this podcast was CPUC. We don't need no stinking physics or engineering. Okay, that title caught me. And then the subtitle is Anti-Nuclear Power Ideology Trumps Physical Principles at the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC. Gene, what were you telling? What are you thinking here?
Okay, so the PUC, unfortunately, is, I would have to characterize this as an out-of-control bureaucracy, and it's a huge bureaucracy. Its annual budget is on the order of $1 billion. That's $1 billion. It's probably the most powerful state agency in California, and basically, if you have a business, PUC is going to be involved in that business.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's real big structural problems. And CGNP, Californians for Green Nuclear Power, has been fighting the PUC probably since our founding. But we really didn't know that until we really started learning the whole process of becoming what's called an intervener, so that we can actually represent the public interest, represent the environment in proceedings involving Diablo Canyon power plant, which is what we've done. And we've filed thousands of pages of written testimony since we started in 2017. We also participate in oral evidentiary hearings. So we really have been very actively involved, and there's a really troubling backstory on what's going on with the PUC. But let's try to just focus. There's too much to cover in one show, so we're going to just focus on we don't need no stinking physics or engineering, because that's the real problem. They don't want to admit that you really power grid in California or any place really obeys the laws of physics.
You know, Dr. Nelson, I was sitting here talking to you before the show, and I've always said that the grid needs to obey the laws of physics, and it also has to have fiscal responsibility. But I love your Substack. When I looked over here and I was sitting there going, I thought that Mel Brooks was the comedian that came up with, I don't need no stinking badges. And I'm looking at this going, wait a minute. And you have brought up in this Substack where this I don't need no stinking badges comes from. The paraphrase of the line, we don't need no stinking badges, came from the 1948 film, The Treasure of Sierra Madre. Actor Alfonso Bedoya, pictured above, said the line, and I wow, that was so cool, because I thought it was the Mel Brooks movie that brought that up.
Right. It really, it entered popular culture in 1948, and I think it really capsulizes a lot of the whole, essentially, anybody that's arrogant says, we don't need no stinking, and then fill in the blank. And that's the problem with the PUC. They're incredibly arrogant, and they don't want to pay attention to the laws of physics, and they don't want to pay attention to the laws of economics.
What is the specific problems that you're seeing there?
Okay, so in California, we've had this, particularly since about 2010, this big push. We have to have lots of solar. We have to have lots of wind. And now they're finally recognizing there's this funny thing called night or calm winds. Oh, we need batteries too. And of course, it's really, it's almost as bad as the Keystone Cops, because really this doesn't, it never worked and it never will work. But they keep trying to push this narrative. And the narrative for me, I also kind of step back and I try to get the big picture. And the big picture is this whole thing about solar, wind, and batteries. To me, it's communist China thought leadership. Why? Because
Wow.
it increases the employment in communist China, where the supply chains for solar, wind, and batteries all start. So it's really a mercantilist perspective
Right.
that's what's driving this thing. And if we look at Spain as an example, they have a socialist government, PSOE, and that government has really pushed to, number one, get rid of nuclear power, and number two, oh, we're going to do lots of wind and solar. And so there appears to have been a big push in April of this year, April of 2025. Oh, the PSOE government is going to show the world that a modern industrial society can be powered by solar and wind. Well, what happened? I happen to be up in Sacramento talking to legislators, and I hear the news. Massive blackout hit Spain and Portugal on April the 28th. And this happened at midday. This is the very first time in history that a blackout has been caused by pushing for solar and wind. What happens is the grid becomes, I use the colloquial term brittle. It really becomes very, very unstable. So it's kind of like, imagine, something just carefully at balance on a knife edge, and then just a
Right.
little push one way or the other, and it falls off the knife edge. And that's what happened to the grid. The Spanish and Portuguese grid collapsed completely in about 15 seconds. There was early warning that morning.
Was it because the nuclear plants, the natural gas plants had fallen out of synchronization?
No. It was because in particular, there were two perfectly good nuclear plants that morning that were standing idle.
No way.
They were standing idle. It gets worse. They were standing idle because Spain came up, they recognized that one of the problems, getting back to that fiscal responsibility thing, one of the problems with solar and wind is they're incredibly expensive. Besides for producing unreliable power, they're also super, super pricey. I know this because I'm an amateur radio operator. And so I have to have all kinds of means to make sure that my radio works when there's an emergency. So yes, I have solar panels. I know how expensive they are. I have a backup battery. I know how expensive that is. Those are the kinds of things. But I also have propane powered generators, not just one, but multiple generators, because I recognize that's really I'm going to be able to handle emergency traffic. But it's solar, super expensive. So what did Spain do? They said, oh, what we'll do is we'll tax the most abundant and reliable form of power, which is nuclear.
Right.
Because it's, the socialist government says, oh, we're supposed to be getting rid of nuclear, at least as long as we're the industrialized West. Now, of course, if we're a member of the BRICS nations, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, etc., oh, they can use all the nuclear they want. But the West, no, 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 no. So of course, Germany is the first country that did that. They actually turned off a very safe and reliable fleet of nuclear power plants. And now we have deindustrialization happening in Germany, as well as just a huge economic crisis. It's really
You're
horrible.
describing that whole process of following net zero and killing nuclear is actually counterintuitive, because nuclear is net zero, but they're using net zero as the excuse.
Right. But the thing is, it's dispatchable and it's reliable, and it's not made in communist China.
Right.
So that's why.
Dang.
That's why they said no, you can't do that. And of course, they're going to exaggerate the risks of nuclear power and point to Chernobyl or Fukushima Daiichi or 3 Mile Island. Now let's go to 3 Mile Island, because I like that one. I was earning my doctorate in radiation biophysics when 3 Mile Island occurred.
Right.
And I was aware at that time there were no injuries from radiation. There were no deaths from radiation in 1979 from that partial meltdown of a nuclear power plant on 3 Mile Island.
All the safety features worked.
Yes, absolutely. But the fearmongers really had a field day. And as a result, one of the side consequences of that was my chances of being employed pretty much went to zero, which is exactly what happened. I had to go out of the field.
Do you remember the China Syndrome movie?
Oh, I most certainly do. I have a copy of it.
It came out right before that. Do
That's
you think
right. Exactly. So you almost wonder anyway.
was it intentional? And it was. Will we
No,
ever find
no,
out?
I think that the big problem with Three Mile Island, I've reviewed the postmortem. The
Right.
flaw was inadequate operator training. So again, the nuclear
Oh,
power industry has figured out, they learned from their mistakes. So one of the things that now, if you look at any nuclear power plant, they always have a simulator. And that simulator is available 24/7. And so
nice.
they use that to train and drill so that the operators are actually prepared for any plausible accident sequence. So as an example, we'll go to December 1st, 2018, Diablo Canyon power plant. It's a sunny morning in December, a Saturday. And they had been steadily adding more and more solar power plants in the area here. So what happened was the instrumentation falsely thought that a conductor had broken on one of there's feeds coming that connect Diablo Canyon to the main AC backbone. They thought one of the special protection circuit thought that one of those lines was broken, scrammed the reactor. The operators were drilled, drilled, and drilled. So as a result, after inspecting the plant, which took less than 5 days, they're bringing it back up. And
Hmm.
that wouldn't happen. And of course, they found everything worked the way it was supposed to work. So it was a nothing burger, but it was a
Right.
nothing burger because of that relentless drilling. 20% of an operator's time now is spent in the simulator. And they're carefully watched and coached. I mean, it's just, and of course, where did this
Twenty
come from?
percent of a operator's time
It's
at a
spent in
nuclear facility is spent in training.
Yes, and that goes on continuously. And that really came out from Hyman Rickover's nuclear navy, which also, again, if you look at injuries from radiation, injury
Zero.
or deaths from radiation in the nuclear navy, which started more than 50 years ago, it's zero.
And
But
you take a 19-year-old kid, Dr. Nelson, and teach him how to be a nuclear person, engineer type, working on a nuclear sub. It's a fantastic type system.
yes, but they do IQ testing before that. So you're looking they definitely take really very well qualified people to do it. It's not just anybody off the street.
Me at 19 would not qualify.
Okay, well, me at 19, if I'd known what I know now, I probably would have signed up as a sub driver.
Oh, there you go.
But at 19, that was 1970, let's see, 71 for me. Yeah. So it was definitely a challenging time for our country. We had, Kent State had happened and all that stuff.
So, what are you doing for Diablo Canyon? Because I love Diablo Canyon had just shut down for, I believe, a week or two, just a week while they were refueling it.
No, it takes about a month.
A month.
And
Right.
what they do is, they're doing service operations.
Right.
So Unit 2 is, I think that outage is still underway right now. I could,
Okay.
but they always do it during the fall or spring so that we're not hitting the big loads, which would happen in either the winter or in summer.
Okay.
So that those outages are when they do all the things that would typically be done with the reactor being shut off. But
Right.
what I've learned, and this is a little bit interesting about how rugged human beings are, they occasionally have to send a human being into the containment while the reactor is operating. And they can do that. Again, they have to watch their dose, but it can happen. So if there's a compelling need, if they can't do it robotically or whatever, you can send a person in, and they're going to use up some of their dose, and they're allowed 500 millirads. I think
Okay.
something. Anyway, I've forgotten my numbers. I haven't looked at that in a while. But basically, it's basically taking the equivalent of like 500 CT scans, and I know about
Ooh.
that because I actually had to have CT scans run. They wanted to make sure nothing was broken after that accident on Monday night.
Oh, nice.
So I went to the hospital. I was transported by ambulance, and my wife came up with our neighbor, who was very kind, because it's more than 100-mile trip to come from San Luis Obispo up to Salinas. And basically, we hung around in the hospital most of the night and
I
finally,
am so glad you're okay.
yeah.
Your poor car is totaled though.
Yeah. So if anybody knows of a spare Toyota, I have had past tense, a RAV4. It's really a wonderful vehicle. It did its job, and I'm in the market looking for a replacement that the insurance will pay for a 2005. So it's
Wow.
or something of that similar cost. But I
Sure.
definitely want a RAV4 because they're really built very, very solidly.
And you're still here.
I'm still here. Both airbags went off, and the front end got mashed in, the back end got mashed in, but all four doors open and closed normally,
Wow. That means the
and no.
passenger area went in. But I mean, they really constructed that. It's not like the Ford Bronco that is now on the road, which is the worst car on the road right now
Mhm.
for passenger safety. I believe
Yeah.
if you get two mosquitoes hitting on the bumper in the back, it squishes it like a accordion. So, I mean,
Yeah,
it's some horrible number.
yeah,
I was like, whoa. Hey, for our podcast listeners, Dr. Gene Nelson is here with us, but he's also got a green headband on. And we
right.
were talking right before the show, and I absolutely love this. He is talked about in the book Atomic Dreams, the New Nuclear Evangelist, and the Fight for the Future of Energy by Rebecca Theus Durko.
Bro.
And I am so excited. I'm going to reach out to her too. I'd love to interview her as
Oh,
well.
she is so sweet. There's a chapter about me in this book. It's called The Guy in the Headband, and that's my trademark, is a green headband. Green for
Nice.
Californians, for green nuclear power, and a headband because I was a long distance runner. I did
Nice.
over 25,000 miles in my life. I'm a militant anti-smoker, and I recognize there's nobody better qualified to take care of myself than me.
There you
Myself.
go. Especially when a don't get a Bronco.
Yeah. And anyway, so Rebecca includes in the chapter, she talks about my interacting with people at the Slow Downtown Farmers Market. I'll be going there tonight in San Luis Obispo, and we've had a booth there since 2017.
Oh,
And it's basically a
nice.
way to reach out to the public. And when we first started, they antis tried to intimidate us into leaving, but we didn't leave. And now they rarely bother us because basically they know they don't have the facts on their side. And, when you're dealing with somebody like myself with a
Yep.
PhD in radiation biophysics, their fear mongering doesn't work.
Not with you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, you brought up, Dr. Nelson, you brought up a couple huge points that really set home to me today. When we take a look at the trading blocks around the world, I've been talking about how they're changing when the Russian war ends. And I think that you're going to see more business with India the United States and India and everything else. And I think that if they're in, as we mentioned, the net zero policies, you're going to see the continued deindustrialization of, let's take Volkswagen out of Germany. They are now saying that they can do better by having more of their manufacturing done in China. Why would you want to buy a Mercedes that was built in China when the Chinese are now notorious for putting in things that can remotely shut down either the grid, the components, or your car? Why would you want to buy a German car? But I'm talking about the deindustrialization of Germany, the UK, the EU, and Canada.
Right.
They're going to continue to move their manufacturing to China. We are reindustrializing as the United States. I think that we are going to really reindustrialize, but we're going to turn our trading to Russia, Saudi Arabia, all of those areas, as well as India. We're going to have Japan really trading with us well. It's going to be a whole change in here.
Yeah, there's a big shift underway. But one of the things that I'm really pleased to see as a scientist is the pushback against so-called net zero, because it's just a propaganda campaign. And it's a propaganda campaign that basically its premises are empty because the claim was, oh yeah, we can reduce emissions and it'll be less costly too. No. It's
Right.
super, super expensive. It's super, super unreliable. And when you compensate for it being unreliable, you end up with much higher costs. So even one of the Bibles of solar and wind, which is Lazard, an insurance company,
Right.
they invented this concept, or they promoted this concept called LCOE, or levelized cost of energy. And
Right.
and that was designed to make solar and wind look good. But they
Right.
were forced to say, oh, gee, there's this thing called night. There's this times when the wind isn't blowing to produce full power. And we have to integrate this crap meaning just really low quality power that you get from solar, wind, and batteries. You
Right.
have to integrate it with the grid, and it costs a whole bunch of money. So there's now something called LCOE Plus, and I recommend you look at that because what you find out is that when you include grid integration costs, suddenly that cheap solar and that cheap wind becomes super expensive, just like that's what we'd expect, and that's really and then they also admit, oh, by the way, if we extend the operation of a nuclear power plant, it's super inexpensive.
Exactly.
So they're showing extended operation at $32 a megawatt hour. Now, for those of you in the listening audience that don't know a megawatt hour, that's 1,000 kilowatt hours. It's basically how power is wholesaled.
Right.
And so for $32, that's 3.2 cents a kilowatt hour. That's really inexpensive for a
Right.
wholesale cost. And power purchase agreements, this thing called Ivanpah, you probably talked about it on your show once or twice. Their PPA, power purchase agreement with Pacific Gas and Electric, was $200 a megawatt hour. $200.
There's the AI data race, the AI data center race that's going on right now. I was hopeful back in 1977 when I wrote my high school paper on fission or fusion, which would be better. And I was hopeful back then that we would be all nuclear by now, but that was back then. But when we sit back and take a look at where the China has put out 2 coal plants a month. They've put out,
No,
they've
a
got
week. Two a week.
2 a week. Thank you. They've got 10 new nuclear plants that they have got already approved and under construction. They will be at 60, I believe 62 to 64 nuclear plants with this year. I mean, within the next year. Unbelievable growth in nuclear. And within 3 to 4 years, they could pass our 92. I believe we have 92 reactors. They could pass us very quickly.
Right. And this is technologies that was invented in the United States and developed in the United States, but they're good at copying things that work. And nuclear power plants work really, really well. And they recognize the need for 24/7 reliable power with lots of synchronous grid inertia. So I'm hoping you're going to ask me the question, what is synchronous grid inertia?
Now that you bring that up, what is that?
Okay, so let's think about there's 2 parts to it. The synchronous part. So if you think about, for example, you've got somebody you're pushing on a swing, you give precise pushes to increase the amplitude of their swinging on the swing. So there's a timing involved. And the same thing works for for any power grid where you have multiple generators. You want them to all be running perfectly in synchrony with each other. So they're all pushing at the same time, they're pulling at the same time. And if they're just a little bit off, I've learned from some senior people that work in the industry, there's a really dramatic thing that happens. The out of sync generator will get ripped off out of the floor. I mean, it's because we're dealing with just huge forces, and it becomes a motor. It becomes a motor, and it will get ripped out of the floor. So they really work very, very hard to make sure they're absolutely in sync. They use very sophisticated mechanisms to make sure that all
and the frequency of the grid, if I understood this correctly, is 60
Hertz,
gigahertz.
60 hertz,
60 hertz. Thank you.
60 hertz.
On the U.S. grid, 50 in the European, and then
Right.
Japan is half 60 and half 50, depending on where they bought their gear.
Yeah. It's a very strange situation, but the important thing is everybody runs on a grid at the same frequency,
Right.
and they're all precisely timed with each other. So what happens when you have synchronous grid inertia? I like to describe it as you got muscle.
Right.
You've got muscle to move huge loads. So in California, the biggest load we have is the Edmonston pumping plant. And its job is to move state water project water
Wow.
that it gets pushed over the Tehachapi's. It gets pushed up almost 2,000 feet. And what they
Wow.
have is 80,000 horsepower motors with four-stage pumps. Okay,
Wow.
and there's not just one of these. No, there's 14 of them.
That's
14.
a lot of horsepower.
That's a lot of horsepower. There are dedicated power plants that are designed to keep that plant running. And
wow.
To give you an idea of the total power demand for Edmonston when it's running full out, you're looking at a fraction of one of the Diablo Canyon power plant reactors. I mean, you need really serious power, but what are you doing? You're allowing Southern California to have adequate water. And without water, I know if I grew up in Southern California, it's a desert. End of story.
This is a bigger issue than I thought. I'm having about 15 epiphanies while I'm talking to you. This is a huge conversation.
Yeah, but it's really important. So what would happen, and I have done the thought experiment, what would happen if you took solar panels and you hooked them up to this giant pumping plant? And let's say you matched the volts and amps that you needed. Well, because it doesn't have muscle, you would just burn out those pumps. That's all. You just burn them out.
Wow.
Because they wouldn't be turning, and they actually, it turns out that
it would just fry them, basically.
It just fries them. That's right. So it really, I'm not really trying to just be negative when I say it's crap power. It really is useless. And it's to give you an idea, if you actually take a grid that doesn't have wind and solar on it,
right,
that grid has lower emissions than the grid with solar and wind. It's counter, it's counter to
say
the
that
propaganda.
again. That is a huge issue that I've been suspecting for a long time.
Right. So again, to repeat, if you have a grid that doesn't have wind and solar on it, it's going to be less emissions. And also, oh, by the way, it's going to cost
cheaper.
Less. It's going to cost less than if you have solar and wind on it. Now, you ask why? Well, it turns out that when we have solar and wind, they're erratically turning on and off, right?
Right.
And that means that you have to have to firm the grid to make sure that it's actually meeting the demands that are needed. You have to be constantly turning generators on and off. Now,
cycling of engines is huge.
And again, you think about the difference between operating a vehicle under cruise control at highway speeds, you use less gasoline, than if you are in city stop and go driving. The same thing happens. Basically, generators are heat engines just like the power plant in your car or truck.
Wow. Dr. Nelson, when my dad he retired as chief of staff of the 8th Air Force, and he was telling me that when he was in Vietnam and they would do a hot standby plane switch on a F4, they would sit there and they would measure the cycles of that engine rather than hours on the engine.
Absolutely.
It's the numbers of time that the engine is turned on and turned off.
Right.
Is the maintenance schedule for those things, because as long as they're running, they're not having the same demand characteristics as on or off.
Right. And so think about a big generator.
Wow.
Now, have you been to Diablo Canyon yet?
No, but I want to. So.
Okay. So we're going to have to work on that, Stu, because I have some inside contacts and I can probably make that happen. But
I'd love that. That would be cool.
Give me some times and dates and things like that. We're in the process of organizing one right now.
Okay.
But the Diablo Canyon Power Plant Hall its length is more than 2 football fields in length, and there are 2 generators powered by steam
Right.
that are producing 1/10 of all of California's power in
Right.
that one building. 1/10
Wow.
of and we're talking about dispatchable, high quality power. And that really, you have to wear hearing protection because it's so noisy in there,
Sure.
but it's clean
Do do you know Doug Sandridge by any chance?
I've heard the name.
Doug Sandridge is a oil and gas executive that created oil and gas executives for and
That's
support
right.
of
Oh yeah,
nuclear.
yeah, exactly.
I would love to drag him along with that because
Oh
he's
yeah,
one.
I'm sure he would love to see that plant because it really is amazing to
Yep.
see this thing. And what's also significant, just to give you a little bit of a spoiler alert, you won't see lots of people scurrying around with clipboards or whatever. No, this thing is really, there's a very competent team in the control room.
Right.
And you get to look through a window and see, it's bulletproof glass, but you can look through the window and see them at work. But it really is, it takes the number of people in charge of it are small. Most of the work is done when the plant is shut down, and it shuts down roughly every 18 months.
Wow.
So it's really, and the rest
Do
of
we
the
go through the simulator? Because I want to pretend I'm James T. Kirk and trying to solve the Kobayashi Maru to make sure that
yes.
I can solve the unsolvable problem. Wouldn't that be
That's
great
right.
fun?
Okay, the simulator is really cool because among other things, one of the scenarios is earthquake.
Yep.
So they have big subwoofers in there. You can feel the rumble from the
No
simulated
way.
earthquake, and then everything all the lights up and the rods drop and so forth. But let's look at reality. And
Okay.
reality was recently illustrated in one, we shared this in one of our filings. There was I think it was a magnitude 4.6 earthquake
Right.
closer to Diablo Canyon than the 2003 quake, which was San Simeon. Now, that quake was powerful enough, it killed 2 in Paso Robles
Oh, so
from
sorry.
unreinforced masonry buildings. Everything fell down and they went rushing outside and they got crushed.
Mm,
But the place where I would want to be when the big one hits, because it's going to hit, when the big one hits California, I would
right.
want to be at Diablo Canyon because it's built so incredibly ruggedly. And they've
Wow.
done really careful what's called structural analysis to make
Right.
sure that those frequencies that are generated by the earthquake aren't going to cause failure of any critical safety system.
That the engineering that they've done there is phenomenal. I follow the Diablo Canyon, LinkedIn and Substack or
Okay.
all their posts that I put out there.
Mhm.
I enjoy watching what they're doing. They seem
Yeah.
like they just are rock stars.
Yes, they really are. The plant itself, I did work there for 3 weeks in April of 2007 as a PhD radiation biophysicist. I was hired as a laborer. So
Nice.
so I was pushing broom and pouring concrete, but I was rad worker qualified. That was easy because of my training. But you have to be rad worker qualified to do anything inside the plant.
Right.
And again, what I learned was people want to come to Diablo Canyon because the plant is so clean and it's so well run. So
Right.
back on July 17th, I participated in a special tour. We had 2 people from the California Public Utilities Commission and myself. Those were the guests. Were just those
Well,
3 people, and it was just such an incredible tour.
nice.
But one of the things they kind of did some stuff, I have to say it was kind of understated, but when you thought about it, said, oh yeah. So we actually had to go through not 1, not 2, but 3 portal detectors to look for radiation. Every single person that's inside what's called
Right.
the radiologically controlled area has to go through that scrutiny. And
Nice.
there was no counts. So that's
Uh,
really about housekeeping more than anything, but of course also doing everything right.
And our nuclear fleet has been done so well, especially with our military. I love I can't remember the name of the project, but we have I believe 18 new nuclear reactors that are being scheduled to be deployed on Air Force bases in the United States very quickly. And I believe that they're rolling on those. I did interview Jay Yu, who is the founder of Nano Nuclear and the CEO. He is, both of those guys are very, very cool guys. And I love the way Nano Nuclear is looking at it. They have their permitting process done in 3 waves right now, Dr. Nelson. They have 2 nuclear reactors that are under permit and approved and moving forward. They have 2 plants so they can mass produce these microreactors underway, and they're doing it at the same time. And they have the fuel already in the approval process so they can move the fuel, the factory, and the things. They're the only one that I know of that's doing it at that speed. We need nuclear at speed.
We do, but you also have to appreciate that if we look at small reactors, so-called microreactors, turns out U.S. has been doing that process from day one of the nuclear navy.
Right.
Those are all microreactors, every single one of them.
And they've been running very successfully.
But in order to have that sustained chain reaction, your enrichment level for the fuel has to go higher. And that's why, as you point out with nanonuclear, you have to be developing new fuel that has a higher enrichment level.
Right.
That's new regulations and new processes, and we have to make sure it's done absolutely right.
Where do you see the biggest holdup for Secretary Chris Wright to be able to deliver nuclear fleet upgrades?
I would say that it's really about education. It's educating people about how reliable and safe nuclear power is. And that really is something that the industry has done, I have to say, a terrible job at. Because they talk about, whenever we talk about it, oh, look at all these engineered safety systems and things. And what that does for somebody that doesn't know about this stuff, oh, this must be scary if there's all these engineered safety systems. And
Dr. Nelson, do you think that the people are waking up to the fact that 3 Mile Island is firing back up is gigantic? I think that is one of the best things that can happen for the U.S. nuclear fleet, because I think that will help do exactly what you do every week out there at that carnival or the outdoor mall that you go to.
Right.
And you stand there and you defend nuclear while you're out there.
Right.
And there, when you look at and you get a crayon, you get your math out, and you start figuring out it's safe.
Yes, there's the best metric is the number of deaths per terawatt hour, and a terawatt hour is 1 billion kilowatt hours.
Wow.
And if you look at the death rate for that, you find out that even when we include Chernobyl and look worldwide, you're looking at nuclear being the same order of magnitude as solar and wind. Because unfortunately, there are deaths associated with solar and wind. And the one that immediately comes to my mind when I think about deaths with wind was there was a malfunctioning wind generator in the Netherlands in 2013. And so they sent 2 young workers, each with families, up to the top of this and see if you can figure out what's wrong. And so they're up in this thing, and it catches fire. And there were fire trucks down below, but because these things are so tall, none of their ladders could reach.
They couldn't help them.
And you couldn't use a helicopter because of the downdraft causes problems. And of course, you got this big blade that's also there as an obstacle. So one of the workers jumped to his death, and the other was incinerated at the top. So that right there, that's 2 more people than have died in the entire history of the U.S. nuclear power industry.
Wow.
And there are there apparently have been hundreds of things like that have occurred with the wind industry.
And we haven't even approached the topic of land use.
Oh yeah,
Of land use in a per square mile megawatt generated on nuclear is just unheard of. It's right there, unbelievable. Natural gas, great, it's there as well. But when you look at the amount of territory that is used by wind farms and the damage by solar panels,
yeah,
wow.
it's really really horrible. But the question, again, we're kind of doing stream of consciousness here, but one of the things that pops into my mind when you talk about land use and solar panels is in eastern San Luis Obispo County, there's a thing called Topaz Solar. It
Right.
covers about 7.8 square miles. It's owned by Berkshire Hathaway. Why does Berkshire Hathaway own it? Well, because of the tax breaks, the taxpayer funded tax breaks is why they operate both solar and wind. And so it's not because they're good for the environment. And so Warren Buffett was quoted in Newsweek in 2013, I think it was, that the only reason why Berkshire Hathaway runs solar and wind is because of the taxpayer-funded tax breaks. And a fellow updated that a couple months ago. He said, if it don't blow money, we're not interested. And that's really tragic.
You bring up three other really good points there. And that is, you talk and good points just fall out. That's kind of cool. The point with Warren Buffett is spot on. And the Inflation Reduction Act, or the Porculus Bill, that is now ended, as Dan Bongino calls it, the Porculus Bill, the subsidies are going to dry up. And as those subsidies dry up, I've been made aware that they have nameplate capacity, and they've been using that where they will replace in a upgrade to get a new turbine put in. If it breaks, they put in a new turbine and call it an upgrade so they can use maintenance dollars in every couple years on these things. And that's what they've been triple dipping and all this stuff in there.
The industry nomenclature is repowering.
Thank you.
So basically what happens is you usually get about 10 years of subsidies. And at the end of those 10 years, we'll repower this. And of course, then they can do it all again. So it's particularly
it's now going to be a problem. I've calculated to start, we need $89 billion to do land reclamation for the wind turbines in the United States to start. That's only to start taking these things down.
Yep. Because unlike nuclear power, which actually they fund the decommissioning of nuclear power plants with the power that's generated, there is no such obligation.
It's part of the upfront. And wind and solar executives say, why do we want to put land reclamation in our projects? Because it turns it, even with subsidies, to totally unfundable.
Right. But if you want to look at the consequence, I had friends that lived near the Tehachapis.
Yep.
In high desert California. So I went up and looked at that wind generation area there. And it's really sad to see all this rusted out wind turbines. There's, they're not turning, but they're ugly as you know what, because there's no money to take them down.
Right.
And it just really is such eyesores. And of course, with solar, what happens particularly, here in California, we put a lot of them in the desert. Well, they get sandblasted.
Right.
And also the solar panels wear out. And so then you get this huge volume of waste that stays toxic forever because there's heavy metals, things like arsenic.
We recycle less than 5% of the solar panels that wear out after a few years.
Right.
And the rest of them we ship overseas.
Right. And then they eventually get landfilled. And of course, it's toxic landfills that stay toxic forever.
So we just described what you had on your great Substack article. We don't need no stinking toxic waste pile over there. I mean, this is absolutely a full circle.
It's so unethical because it's being branded as this is supposed to be good for the environment, when the reality is, nope, this is really bad news for the environment. And when we
Right.
compare and contrast that with nuclear power, we've only used 5% of the power in that fuel. So we carefully isolate it from the environment in these things called ISFCs, interim storage facility installations.
Right.
And that material, its economic value, I would assert, is on the order of that with gold, because we still can tap that energy.
I couldn't agree more, sir.
Right,
and I interviewed the CEO of Copenhagen Atomics,
Oh, yeah.
and Thomas Jam is a really neat guy. They are looking at being able to use nuclear waste for their fuel.
Absolutely. And it's there was a guy named Alvin Weinberg, and he ran the Oak Ridge lab. And so he actually had something called the Molten Salt Reactor Experiment, or MSRE, and it accumulated something like 13,000 hours of operation over a long period of time while he was still in charge of the plant. And President Reagan came along and said, "Oh, that stuff it's burning plutonium. We don't want that." And he shut the thing down. Okay, but the story doesn't end there. This is actually now being commercialized by the Chinese communists.
Oh, snap.
Yeah, snap indeed. Yep. To me, just total insanity. And most of it has to do with this dogma that says that nuclear power is bad. And there isn't. There is not truth to that statement.
Does the left or the green energy New Deal folks really understand that if they embraced nuclear, they could get their EVs faster? Because if they really want to think about it, the EVs are powered by coal and natural gas right now. Mm-hmm. We have the 92, that is only ballpark 17%, whatever our nuclear
we can
fleet,
use 20%. Let's make it easier to calculate.
20% of nuclear fleet. The odds are
of the U.S. power comes from our nuclear fleet.
Thank you. And so when you take a look at that, 20%, you have a 80% chance that you're either running natural gas or coal.
Right. And of course, let's consider California. And we're going to go to Los Angeles. Okay. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power operates the 1,800 megawatt Intermountain Power Plant near Delta, Utah. And then they have a direct line that takes that power and sends it to Southern California. So that Intermountain plant is powered by coal. And so you're charging up your EV with Intermountain Power Plant coal-powered electricity. Hey, what's the environmental benefit of that? Nope.
But Gavin said a couple months ago, I don't have no coal in California. I don't have no coal in California.
That's right. That's right. And it's all out of state. And so it's called outsourcing pollution. And California they're the only state that has a legal euphemism called unspecified power. And unspecified power, it's like, we don't want to know where it came from, but
wow.
But it's coal. And that legal euphemism was created by the coal power industry. They lobbied.
It's kind of like when Gavin imported 2 weeks ago a couple tankers, I believe it was a tanker, maybe even more, of jet fuel that was refined in India, and I tracked it down. The last 5 tankers that hit that Indian refinery were from Russia. That's a lot of CO2 being put in. They're supposed to be green energy folks, and they're importing jet fuel from India.
And of course, one of the sources of the petroleum that's used by both India and China is Iran.
Iraq, Iran both interact with each other in trading in the dark fleet. There are 1,500 dark fleet tankers. They all park in Malaysia right now as the major spot for them to now flip everything back and forth. It's a mess, and Gavin Newsom has really eviscerated California's entire energy policies.
Right, and one of the things I'm sure you've talked about this on your show, about the idea that California has a specific kind of RFG, that's a reformulated gas, that's created in California refineries, but those refineries, they're pushing them out of business. They're making it hard for those refineries to continue to operate, so they're closing down. So now the plan is that they're going to get that from Sinopec. Do you know what Sinopec is?
It is China's refinery system.
Refiners. So the idea is we're going to get something that's so vital for our economy from our enemy. Do you think that that's a good idea? Well, if you do, just look at Russia and its use of natural gas as a means to lever Germany into not opposing Russia's grab of Ukraine starting in 2014.
That's a whole nother podcast, sir.
Oh yes, it is. But it's really showing how incredibly important energy is, because energy and economy, they're pretty much so tightly interwoven. And
And the
when I
number
got
of
into,
people that have
excuse me,
left California because of the over-regulatory problems and the
right.
taxes has been unbelievable.
It is really tragic, I think. Here I am in San Luis Obispo. I'm quote unquote retired, but I'm instead putting in huge amounts of time and energy donating it, because I look and I see what they're proposing to do, and it's just so totally nonsensical.
Wow.
And again, the PUC is an executive branch agency in California. It was started with the noblest of intentions. It was actually originally the Railroad Commissions, formed in 1918. And that was because the railroads, people like Leland Stanford, were gouging businesses because they basically had a monopoly on
Right.
moving the freight. And so the Railroad Commission basically said, okay, you're now regulated industries, and we're going to be making sure you don't gouge. Well, what's happened since then is that bureaucracy now is completely captured
Wow.
by special interests, and those special interests don't have the interests of Californians. They're way down on the
No,
priority list.
they
And
really are not.
so as a result, California has the dubious distinction at most of the time, their power is the most expensive per kilowatt hour in the continental United States. So we're excluding Alaska and we're
Yep.
excluding Hawaii.
Hawaii is a whole nother sad story.
Exactly. And again, they're caught up in the same kind of nonsense as California and New York and several other blue states. And the bottom line is it's becoming expensive. Now, what happens when power is expensive? There is some elasticity to the demand, but it's essentially inelastic. So what happens is you do kind of push down consumption a little bit, and then they can say, oh, well, look, we've reduced emissions because we've made this power uneconomical. We've driven away business. Well, we've reduced emissions, and that's so important. We don't care about the fact that we then have to jack up taxes because those businesses that were supporting the state government, they left for Texas or places like that.
I'll tell you what's fun is I see who is reading my websites and everything else by location.
Right.
And my two biggest states are New York and California.
Right.
And it is so fun to see that people are really want the truth about energy. They're tired
Yes.
of listening to mainstream media.
Yep. And mainstream media is bought and sold. It's really, I was visiting another member of Californians for Green Nuclear Power a few days ago, and I actually sat down and watched a few minutes of network news, and it was just
Wow.
so, I'm glad that I don't watch it. It really is so that you can tell there's so much narrative control, and I think it's much better that we do have things like your energy podcast to actually let people know what's really going on rather than what the corporate masters want us to believe is going on.
I'll tell you what. Well, how do people get a hold of you, Dr. Nelson? Because I know that somebody listens to this podcast. Like I said yesterday, I had a podcast and it went out, and then within hours, they were getting phone calls and saying, hey, we need help. So I love being able to do that. How do people reach you?
Okay, so there's a few different ways. My preferred way is by cell phone. And my cell phone is actually on the website, but I'm going to read it to you here on the air and also tell you what my protocol is.
Okay.
There is area code 805-363-4697. And if you're not in my contact list, I'm going to just let it go to voicemail.
Yep.
So leave a complete message please include your contact information at least twice, and
Right.
I'll get back to you very, very quickly after your call. Then, of course, email. You can reach me at CGNP. That's Californians for Green Nuclear Power. And my email address is government, GOVERNMENT, @np.org. So those, again, that's also on the website, the CGNP website. But so we have a website that also has a place for donations. So you can look in the About page of CGNP. Again, cgnp.org, go to About, and you can see how you can make donations because we're a nonprofit. We've had over our history, we've had a few generous private donors, and
Nice.
we had one, and I count this one. We were entitled to some intervener compensation from the PUC back in 2018. We received a substantial chunk of money, about $250,000.
Nice.
But since then, since the industry figured out, oh yeah, we're telling the truth.
Right.
We don't like that. And of course, the PUC is very much, as I said, a captured bureaucracy. So as a result, we haven't received a penny, despite going through all the procedures since late 2018.
Wow.
And of course, the PUC knows about CGNP, and in particular, they know about this guy in the headband, and they don't like us at all. And so there's another one thing on the Green Nuke Substack about the PUC on that same tour that I was talking about at Diablo Canyon, where the administrative law judge, Jack Chang, he ordered me to stop talking at what he asked a question, said, I don't want to hear from you. I want to hear from PG&E.
Wow.
And that's that's called lack of judicial temperament, to be that rude.
That's nuts.
And unfortunately, from what I dug into his background, and I actually filed a motion to have him taken off as the administrative law judge. Now, I knew that was an exercise in futility, but I wanted to make a statement. Statement that these folks really aren't well qualified, and they certainly aren't doing a good job, because I also found out that he was actually just finishing up his doctorate. He's a non-traditional student. Bravo to him for that. So he's around age 60, and he just finished his doctorate this year.
Nice.
At
least he finished.
Berkeley. Yeah, good that he finished. But unfortunately, I argued in the proceeding, in my motion, hey, when you look at Cal HR, one of their requirements for an administrative law judge, they're supposed to have 1 year legal experience after they've earned either a Juris Doctor or a PhD.
Wow.
Would he have had that because he just earned his doctorate? So I argued that he is not qualified to be.
Oops.
And of course, they said, oh, we carefully vetted everybody that, well, of course, it's a whitewash.
Nice.
Yeah.
Of course, the rules don't apply to them.
We don't need no stinking rules
until you apply.
Right. And
as soon as you apply, they're going to make sure that we can't allow a green headband.
Right. Or something like that. It's there. We can't allow the truth is the big problem with the PUC. And
I'll tell you what, this has been a fantastic discussion, and I truly appreciate our friendship and our time. I'm going to have all of your contact information in the show notes, and I want to make sure that people can get a hold of you. And I want you back again when we get ready for the next podcast, because I've got about 16 items that I'm now thinking about that you brought up.
Thank you. This is stuff. This has become my life. I've donated around 30,000 hours to this project pro bono since 2016. My wife is saying in the background, because of course our budget is really ruined by the fact that I'm spending so much time on this project. But this is my legacy.
And the consumers that are aware of it will appreciate you.
Yes.
Because what you're doing is needed for California. California is in a energy national security crisis right now.
That's right.
And you are needed. Your voice is a voice of reason, Dr. Nelson. I do appreciate you.
Thank you. And of course, the fact that we have, according to the governor, we have 44 military bases or federally funded research and development centers in California. They all need 24/7 reliable power.
Right. And then why are we importing in jet fuel? Air Force One cannot a military cannot use imported from India or other sources. It has to be sourced in certain ways for Air Force One. So poor old Trump better have a tanker sitting out there filling up Air Force One if he comes out to California.
Yeah, it's there's so many bits of crazy that clearly we do have a lot to talk about, Stu.
I'm sorry to lob that grenade at you.
Okay, yeah, I'm not responsible for it, so it's no big for me. But again, there's just so much irrationality about energy, and really, the more people can educate themselves and then push for reforms. For example, having Chris Wright as Secretary of Energy is just so absolutely wonderful.
Isn't he fun?
Yeah.
I've got the form filled out. I'm ready to turn it in to get him on the podcast as well too.
Make sure you keep me informed. I want to watch that podcast.
Oh, absolutely. And again, your Substack I love is greennuke.substack.com. So thank you very much for stopping by.
All right. Thank you, Stu.